My name is Dennis Spig. I run the security for World Wrestling, and one of our wrestlers that lives down there is missing.
Okay, what's his name?
Chris Benoit.
You get this damage in your brain that even after you stop getting hit in the head will continue to spread and changes who you are and how you behave and what you become.
When Chris Benoit returned home from wrestling events, his wife often accused him of drinking. Little did she know that his dazed behavior was actually a result of concussions. Then tragedy struck, and at first, no one could quite believe it. Chris Benoit did the unthinkable. He killed his wife, his 7-year-old son, and then himself. Today, doctors point to his head injuries as the primary cause.
The degeneration of his brain changed who he was and what he was capable of.
While Benoit was struggling with the death of his best friend and marital problems, it was the brain damage that transformed him into a different person.
The evidence indicates that it was a particularly brutal and vicious murder. It showed some sign of real rage.
All right, we'll go ahead and send somebody out there to check on it.
Concussions and professional sports. Not football this time, but pro wrestling.
Professional wrestlers are 20 times more likely to die before age 45 than professional football players.
When I heard about what happened with Chris Benoit, I immediately remembered a conversation I'd had with him maybe 6 months prior. I remembered that he had sat next to me in the locker room and he said, "I heard you writing a book about concussions." I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "I'm interested in what you're learning." And he's like, "How many concussions have you had, before you had to retire?" And I said, "Well, I can remember at least 6, but I probably had more." And I said, "How many have you had?" And he said, "I've had more than I can count." I wonder if the reason he was asking me to call him was that he knew that something was going on, but he didn't quite appreciate what that was.
Throughout his career, Benoit suffered hundreds of concussions. The wrestling star turned into a monster. In this documentary, we analyze how head injuries permanently alter wrestlers. Our research involved conversations with wrestlers who helped us put things into perspective. We examine who's affected, what limitations arise, how the consequences can even be fatal, and why WWE still isn't taking the issue seriously enough.
But I'm still permanently damaged.
I get headaches every day.
He wants to come after your title.
I saw 1,000,000 stars lying in the ring, and I said, "Okay, you've had another concussion."
You didn't want to believe it. Can't believe it. Can't be true. But it was.
Chris Benoit knew no limits. He took numerous unprotected chair shots to the head and other severe blows. His finisher, the diving headbutt, was particularly notorious. Harley Race, who invented the move, regretted creating it because it caused lasting damage to many wrestlers, especially Benoit.
Chris Benoit's diary is revealing new information about his state of mind. The wrestler wrote a series of letters to his best friend. At one point, Benoit wrote, "I'll be with you soon."
Mike Benoit believes it's the diary of his son going mad.
We just didn't understand this was going on at that time in Chris's life.
Friday evening, it appears that there was some sort of altercation between Chris and Nancy, that Chris restrained Nancy with duct tape and then utilized a telephone cord to strangle her. On Saturday, Chris, we assume, gave his son Daniel Xanax and then murdered him in his room. On Sunday, Benoit makes a couple searches on the internet that are chilling in retrospect. One, for a story in the Bible about the prophet Elijah and the resurrection of a dead boy in the Old Testament. And then a search about the quickest and most painless way of breaking one's own neck.
Former champion Chris Benoit found dead in his Atlanta home along with his wife and young son. Police now treating the discovery as a double murder-suicide.
Benoit had an intense on-stage persona. He was nicknamed the Rabid Wolverine, the Canadian Crippler.
There was damage in areas that you would think could influence emotional behaviors.
A frequently cited study from West Virginia University came to a shocking conclusion. Benoit's brain resembled that of an 85-year-old Alzheimer's patient.
When you look at Christopher Benoit's brain, it is in fact shocking. Our findings showed extensive areas of tau protein deposition throughout his brain. Tau protein is a marker for brain damage.
The diagnosis was CTE. CTE is the horror disease that all wrestlers fear. It stands for chronic traumatic encephalopathy, a complex term for brain disease.
The brain disease linked to years of repeated hard hits to the head.
60-year-old NFL player, 83-year-old player.
It's as if tiny knots form in the brain, disrupting normal functions. The terrible thing about CTE is that it appears long after the injuries occur and progressively worsens. Some sufferers forget how to do the simplest things: getting dressed, maintaining hygiene, operating everyday objects like microwaves or dishwashers. Other symptoms include memory loss, dementia, difficulty concentrating, suicidal thoughts, and personality and behavioral changes such as aggression and outbursts of anger.
In wrestling, there's a before Chris Benoit incident and after. And I was there at a time before. Chris was one of those guys that was backstage and he was just aggressive, and you just knew he was a guy not to be messed with.
The change of character in Chris Benoit was gradual, but terrifying. No one could have predicted such a drastic derailment, but those close to him describe how he became increasingly unpredictable and aggressive shortly before his death. Dark research findings show that certain head injuries can contribute to criminal behavior.
What I knew about CT at that time was that there were 4 cases of NFL players. 2 had died by suicide, and 1 had started hearing voices and led the police on a chase through upstate New York and died in a fiery crash going on the wrong side of the highway.
Did the blows to the head Benoit received in the wrestling ring fundamentally change his brain?
Benoit is just one of many killers who became unpredictable due to brain damage. The same applies to the Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez, Henry Lee Lucas, Jeffrey Dahmer, and John Wayne Gacy. Many serial killers have one thing in common: they suffered head injuries during their lives. In football, there is also a tragic story similar to Benoit's. Aaron Hernandez ended up in prison for murder after his NFL career, and he took his own life there. The examination of his brain revealed something shocking: severe injuries in areas responsible for moral decision-making and impulse control. These injuries were linked to CTE.
Well, we're looking at a microscopic slide and a microscopic picture of the brain of a normal individual. The same in a football player about 40 years old.
Unfortunately, this terrible disease isn't uncommon in wrestling. Wrestler Andrew Martin, aka Test, died in 2009. Doctors determined that Test also suffered from CTE due to repeated blows to the head. In his case, the disease led to severe psychological problems, depression, and never-ending headaches. He numbed himself with drugs. His drug use escalated. Ultimately, he overdosed and died. Another example of repeated head injuries is Bryan Danielson, one of the best technical wrestlers of his generation. In interviews, he talks about his history with concussions.
Within the first 5 months of my wrestling career, I'd already had 3 concussions. When you've been wrestling for 16 years, that adds up to a lot of concussions.
Like Chris Benoit, Bryan also uses flying headbutts and hard head strikes in his matches. Early in his career, the number of concussions grew. He didn't know how dangerous they were. Daniel Bryan also experienced seizures after concussions, as he revealed in an interview with ABC News.
Bryan says some of the concussions he suffered led to seizures.
I was with him with one of his seizures after a concussion. And I mean, it scared me so bad, I lost it.
I just implored her, please don't say anything to anybody.
Yeah.
Brian made a grave mistake. He lied about his injury history, concealing that he had already suffered numerous concussions.
But if I tell them if I have a concussion, they're not going to let me do what I do anymore.
When WWE doctors discovered this, they were shocked, according to Brian. He was no longer cleared to wrestle and had to announce his retirement.
I took a test that said that maybe my brain isn't as okay as I thought it was.
Cameras captured the tears in fans' eyes as Brian explained his decision. He spoke openly about the consequences of his head injuries, the seizures he experienced, and the fear of permanent damage.
The more concussions you have, the more susceptible you are to them. What they're kind of finding out with concussions is that it's not the amount of concussions you have, it's whether or not your brain heals after a concussion.
However, Brian's story took an unexpected turn. After 2 years of intensive medical treatment and rehabilitation, he surprisingly returned to the ring in 2018. His comeback was a triumph of human will. Brian wrestled a different style than before, adapting a less risky moveset. Over time, though, he began to let this disciplined caution slip. Nowadays, he's back to performing his flying headbutt, a decision that has drawn criticism. Today, Brian struggles with some typical CTE symptoms. In interviews, he frequently mentions his memory lapses. Wrestlers we spoke to during our research also mentioned memory gaps they attribute to concussions. A former wrestler who wishes to remain anonymous speaks of blanks. I often forget simple everyday terms like table or glass. It's scary to know that this word just doesn't exist in my brain anymore. Everyone knows the feeling when words are on the tip of your tongue, but this is different. It's just black. Ted DiBiase also struggles with forgetfulness after his career ended. Bret Hart does too. He's also plagued by never-ending headaches, triggered by a severe concussion in a match against Goldberg.
He gave me a elbow in the face, about the same as someone taking a brick and pillowcase and just swinging it at you as absolutely as hard as you can. He knocked me out cold in the corner. I saw stars.
Goldberg has a reputation for wrestling unsafely and riskily. In the past, he injured numerous wrestlers, never intentionally of course, but Bret Hart criticizes him to this day for never really learning the art of wrestling.
Threw me in the ropes and kicked me with every ounce of strength he had in his whole body, with every full extension. His leg is completely straight. If you learn pro wrestling, Bill, you know that you bend your leg a little bit.
Besides Goldberg, there are other wrestlers known for unsafe in-ring actions. These include Ryback and Nia Jax. The latter is responsible for at least 2 head injuries in female wrestlers, Becky Lynch and Kairi Sane. The criticism of Jax was loud, and she herself addressed the backlash by ironically giving herself the nickname Opponent Crippler. Older wrestling stars, in particular, recount the severe consequences of their daredevil decisions in the ring. Mick Foley can't remember some matches because of the brutal falls or blows to the head he endured. He fell from the cage twice, perhaps the craziest bumps in wrestling history. Besides dangerous injuries all over his body, he also suffered a severe concussion.
I realize I don't have as many teeth as I used to.
I was just looking down, waiting on him to move.
It knocked me out legitimately.
Foley experienced memory loss after the match, which is ironic because he created something wrestling fans will never forget. But he is paying a steep price. Today, Foley struggles with dizziness, grogginess, headaches, and cognitive problems. Kurt Angle is also noticing increased memory loss and cognitive issues. He suffered one of his many concussions at SummerSlam 2000 when Angle's head hit the concrete floor. Triple H told the whole story on the Impulsive podcast.
But we come down and I watch his head smash into a control box. We hit and I go down and I hear Kurt start snoring. He's out like cold. This is where the story gets terrible because today we know about concussions and everything else. So I put my hand on him. I go, Kurt, you okay? And he wakes up and he starts trying to get up and take a mouthpiece that he doesn't have in out of his mouth. He's out and has no idea where he is.
After the injury, Angle was taken to the locker room, but the doctors carelessly cleared him to continue, and he later returned to the match. Thanks to intensive research in this area, we now know how irresponsible it was to give Angle the go-ahead to keep wrestling. To avoid brain damage, it's crucial that a concussion is allowed to heal properly.
CTE and head trauma led to his going off the deep end.
After years of suffering blows to the head and many concussions.
Well, the problem is not necessarily always with the number of concussions. It has to do with how you treat them afterwards.
This is former WWE wrestler Christopher Nowinski, an expert on sports-related concussions.
Got a concussion in the summer of 2003 that I never recovered from.
We got through the end of the match, but I had a headache that just wouldn't go away. And unfortunately, I didn't realize that was a big deal. I was confused, forgot where I was, what we were doing.
He had to end his wrestling career after a severe case of post-concussion syndrome.
I had bad symptoms, I had headaches, I got sick every time my heart rate went up, but I didn't speak up, I didn't stop. And so I wrestled or worked out almost every day for 5 weeks until I developed sleepwalking. And once I woke up on the floor of a hotel room, having jumped off the bed into the wall into the nightstand, I was fearful enough of going to sleep that I finally decided to find out what's wrong with my brain.
After Nowinski retired, he dedicated himself to becoming an expert on concussions in sports.
Part of the problem with me not recovering was that I didn't realize that concussions are something that you couldn't mess with.
He helped make enormous strides in the research, treatment, and prevention of concussions. He's also one of Rob Van Dam's advisors. RVD suffered an exceptionally high number of head injuries and concussions throughout his career.
Have you had any previous concussions? This is your first?
I've had hundreds.
Hundreds, really?
Really.
RVD described how the concussions felt. Balls Mahoney hit me with a chair, then bang, and everything was in slow motion. Sometimes the sound would cut out, sometimes everything would spin.
He would hit it so hard, and he took pride in how hard he hit, and I took pride in how hard I could take a hit. And I didn't realize that when I would wake up and feel like I should be rolling over in my bed, but then all of a sudden there's thousands of people looking at.
The frequency and severity of these injuries didn't come without consequences. An examination of his brain revealed alarming results. He was diagnosed with cerebellar atrophy. This diagnosis explains the symptoms RVD has been complaining about for years, including dizziness and vision problems.
You have to think about hits to the head, like we think about smoking and lung cancer. When you start young enough, you're going to open up the door to lung cancer, just like if you get hit in the head thousands of times every year while your brain is still developing, you're opening up the door to CTE.
RVD admits that during his active time, he underestimated the danger of concussions. I had double vision, but I just thought it would be gone tomorrow, so I didn't tell anyone. The show must go on. This show must go on mentality is extremely dangerous. Over the years, it led to severely injured wrestlers continuing their matches. It meant matches weren't stopped after concussions, even though that would have been crucial. The show must go on is a life-threatening motto, as the following incident shows. May 28th, 2001, Hayward, California. The Great Khali was at the very beginning of his wrestling career and had a fateful training match. His opponent, the enthusiastic up-and-coming wrestler, Brian Ong. The two were practicing a spine buster, but on the second attempt, Ong landed awkwardly, hitting his head on the mat and losing consciousness. What no one knew at the time was that Ong had already suffered a concussion shortly before. Multiple concussions in a short period can lead to a dangerous second impact syndrome where the brain swells dramatically. Ong was taken to the hospital, but doctors couldn't save him. The 27-year-old died from the effects of a traumatic brain injury. The Ong family subsequently sued APW and its owner Roland Alexander for negligent homicide. The court ruled in favor of the family and awarded them millions in compensation. The grim reality of wrestling is that almost every wrestling star has suffered dangerous concussions. The list of wrestling stars who've had at least one concussion is significantly longer than those who've never had one. Even in modern wrestling, it still happens frequently. Alexa Bliss had to take a long break due to multiple concussions in a short period.
I took a headlock takeover, and when I did, my head went straight into the mat. This stuff happens, and it was no one's fault.
With rumors even circulating about a potential career end.
I had a really bad headache. I told our doctors, I said, hey, something's just not right. My head just doesn't feel right.
Bliss was able to return to the ring. Corey Graves wasn't so lucky. Today he's one of WWE's main announcers. He's so good at his job as a commentator that no one realizes he's a former wrestler. He was considered a great talent in NXT and trained with the likes of Sami Zayn, Roman Reigns, and Seth Rollins. Journalists were already calling him a future WWE champion. Unfortunately, multiple concussions forced him into early retirement. Logan Paul was completely out of it after experiencing a concussion.
Goodness, what a collision!
The interview afterward shows the severe effects.
Do you have a message for anybody else who wants to come after your title?
Come get it. I need a second. If you just...
Logan Paul experienced memory gaps afterward. Not uncommon. The Undertaker also suffered memory loss after the concussion in the streak match against Brock Lesnar.
I got hurt so bad, I don't even remember that match. So today, I don't remember it. And when I finally did watch it back for the first time, I watched it like I'd never seen it before.
Shane McMahon too, after that coast to coast, he didn't know where he was after the brutal collision. Dolph Ziggler reported something similar after a concussion. Jack Swagger hit him with a stiff kick to the face. Ziggler couldn't remember even traveling to the show afterward. This and other concussions ended Ziggler's main event push. The rising star was seen as too injury-prone in Vince McMahon's eyes and never made it back to the top. His value in the company plummeted rapidly. One reason for the concussions was reportedly the way he took moves. Ziggler tried to make his opponents look as strong as possible, sometimes falling dangerously on his head. Rhea Ripley made the same mistake. She too had numerous concussions due to risky selling. When she takes moves, she sells them impressively. Often she intentionally lets herself fall on her neck, making it look like she's falling on her head. But sometimes this can go wrong. Ripley has had several brain injuries in WWE. Symptoms included dizziness, confusion, and loss of consciousness. WWE doctors were able to diagnose the concussions. Ripley had to take a break as a result. The list of head injuries in WWE is long, and it's getting longer. WWE, as the largest wrestling company, faced massive criticism for this. Former wrestlers accused ex-boss Vince McMahon and those in charge of acting negligently, accepting injuries, and not protecting wrestlers. In July 2016, over 50 former WWE employees, including wrestlers, referees, and managers filed a class action lawsuit against the company.
Dozens of retired male and female wrestlers are suing WWE for neurological injuries during their time with the company.
The main point of criticism was that WWE was responsible for severe head injuries and long-term consequences, such as CTE.
Vito LaGrasso and Evan Singleton filed suit, accusing the WWE of failing to diagnose concussions and sending people into the ring injured.
It was undisputed that the health problems of those affected were a result of their wrestling lives. However, the lawsuit failed in 2018, even on appeal. It wasn't possible to prove direct legal violations.
When I first started working for WWE, which was 2000, there wasn't a whole lot of concussion testing or anything like that, but there wasn't in any sports.
WWE has finally realized that the health of their athletes must be the top priority, especially when it comes to the dangers of concussions.
The WWE implemented a talent wellness program that now includes impact concussion testing.
At the heart of their protective measures is the revolutionary Impact program, a cutting-edge computerized testing system that measures wrestlers' cognitive abilities. Every WWE superstar must undergo this test. It's like a digital fingerprint of the brain, determining whether a concussion has occurred. But WWE goes even further. When wrestlers take a bad bump to the head, a strict protocol kicks in. The affected athlete is immediately pulled from the match. The show must go on is no longer the top priority.
Athletes are like thoroughbreds. Someone has to pull the reins because they will run themselves into the ground if given that opportunity.
WWE has also recognized that prevention is the best protection. In a groundbreaking decision, chair shots to the head were banned, once an iconic element of sports entertainment.
In the 90s, we used to take chair shots to the head. That was a badge of honor. And what I mean by that is someone would swing a steel chair at your head, and I literally remember you would, tense yourself and tense your neck and just take it. They hit you on the head with it, and you just take it. That was expected. If you had a concussion in wrestling, you just shake it off. Shake it off, go in there and do it. And all of us did it.
Today, things are different. Wrestlers who intentionally target an opponent's head with a chair face severe penalties. The era of reckless hits to the head is over. The pile driver is also largely banned, a move with a dark history. This move was responsible for numerous severe injuries. The same goes for the brainbuster, which can only be performed by a select few top technicians. WWE closely scrutinizes their performers' movesets and questions which actions are too dangerous. But what's the most impressive is the culture of awareness that WWE has created. Annual seminars bring together wrestlers, referees, and producers to educate them on the latest findings about concussions. It's like an army gearing up against an invisible but very dangerous enemy.
A lot of things changed, and a lot of things changed for the good. Anytime you can, keep guys, healthier longer, I'm not going to say it's a bad thing. And if you notice, you don't see the amount of wrestler deaths now like you used to. So it was a good change.
However, even in modern WWE, there's plenty of room for criticism. When Vince McMahon was still in charge, he made a fateful mistake. The SummerSlam match between Brock Lesnar and Randy Orton ended in scandal. Lesnar hit Orton with real, hard elbow strikes to the head. Soon blood was flowing, and the referees declared Lesnar the winner by technical KO, but footage of the strikes shows how reckless they were. The WWE boss planned a realistic-looking end to his show, but the actions and injuries were just as real. There's a reason why wrestling is scripted and usually performed safely, namely so that this kind of thing doesn't happen. Orton suffered a gash that needed stitches. Much worse, he suffered a severe concussion. He was out of action for a while. This incident sparked a wave of outrage. Critics accused WWE of recklessly endangering their athletes' health. Chris Jericho, a veteran of wrestling, confronted Lesnar backstage, and it led to a heated argument.
He was doing a match with Randy Orton, and he was butchering him with elbows to the head. I didn't know if it was planned or not. Elbows to the side of the head can kill you. Your temple, if you get hit hard enough in the temple, you die. I was fucking angry about it, and Brock came through, decided he wanted to come challenge me, and we got into a little bit of an issue. And I was like, fuck this guy. I don't give a shit how big he is. Like, I don't fucking care.
After a short altercation, officials got in between and stopped the fight. The message was clear. Even within the WWE family, there were deep concerns about the boundaries that were crossed here. Looking back at the Chris Benoit tragedy, a lot has changed. WWE takes concussions more seriously than ever, yet they will always be part of wrestling. Research on head injuries is advancing and helping us understand more and more how terribly brain damage can end. Today's wrestlers are grateful for the learning curve WWE has gone through. But worldwide, there are hundreds of amateur promotions where concussions are still not taken seriously, most of the time not even diagnosed. Many WWE wrestlers begin their careers in these promotions. Others never make it to WWE but suffer the same damage. A decision to wrestle is still a decision to take major health risks, including those of the scariest kind: brain damage, CTE, and everything that comes with it.
I still deal with way more headaches than I should. I still can't get my heart rate up. I can't like sprint without getting sick.
I get headaches every day. Maybe some unrecorded concussions that I had.
And the concern now is, will I develop this disease, or do I have this disease, chronic traumatic encephalopathy?
I wake up every morning, and for the first 10 to 20 minutes that I'm walking around, I'm hunched over, and it looks like I was in a minor car accident the day before. And that's just life. That's going to be the way I am the rest of my life.